Well, hello, friends, and welcome to the month of August. I am so excited to be with all of you and talk about what you need to be doing in your bees this month as we go into the hot, potentially dry summer months. It's a big month. There's a lot to cover. And I'm so excited to dive in. And I really appreciate you guys spending 30, 45 minutes with me just to talk about practical beekeeping and what we need to do to keep your bees healthy and strong through the month of August. If we haven't met before, my name is Blake. I'm one of the owners of the Bee Supply, and I went from about two beehives in my backyard to over 30,000 over the past 20 years. And so my goal in these monthly buzz presentations is to take all those lessons I've learned along the way and boil them down so that they're helpful for you with a few hives in your backyard. So I'm really excited to dive in. We've got a lot of great things for you this month. So let's talk real quick before we get started. If you live anywhere in Texas or the surrounding states, we'd love to sell you some bees. We have a few complete beehives left with bees in them. We're almost out, but we will be selling them through the month of August. So if you do want to pick up some bees before the end of the year, this is your last shot. So scan that QR code, go to our website, and you can grab some bees last chance before next year. This is also, we have global pollen patties in stock. This is the ultimate summer feed as your bees are grappling with a diminishing pollen flow, giving them some pollen patties through the month of August and September and October is really, in most regions, going to give them a significant boost. We'll talk more about that later tonight, but we've got those in stock for you now. And then stand soft sugar bricks are phenomenal for summer trickle feeding. So if you've got a hive that already has, a box of extra honey or syrup on it, but you want to give them a little bit of food and a little bit of a boost and maybe increase the brood production. A stand soft sugar brick is a great solution for that summer trickle feeding. So I would give it to a hive that may not need a whole nother gallon of syrup, but needs a little bit of food or a little bit of a boost. This is really going to be helpful to help them get through that summer dearth that we'll talk about more. Last quick thing before we hear from Chari, if you want freebies, scan the QR code. Our bee warranty is for sale. And you can buy this warranty for any bees that you've purchased through the bee supply. And if your beehive dies, then you will get a free beehive next year. We had tons of people take advantage of this last year. And this spring, all of those folks that bought this warranty got a free beehive. So we know with a loss rate of about 50%, this is well worth the money to get that free beehive next year. So, with that, Sherry, tell us what is going on in our education this month.
Okay, hi. Switch my
Hey,
slides. Switch my slides
there you
video.
go.
There we go. Hi, Blake. You know what's going on is it's hot outside. Have y'all put on a bee suit lately in this heat? It's a little bit hot inside that suit, but we have a wonderful August coming. This is everything we need to know as beekeepers collectively as we go through the month of August. And as I've said in webinars past, even though this says per week, all of these articles they'll drop, as they say, on August 1st on the website. So when you view this after August 1st, it's going to already be there. All of these will be there. But if you're signed up and you're in the know, like it says on that slide, you're going to get these fed to you each week of the month. Week one, surviving the summer dearth. Oh boy, we're going to need that. We need to read that. Week two, spotty brood. This is a big deal. And for those that aren't real familiar with what brood signals are, I encourage you to read this article because it's good. You're going to learn a lot from what you need to do, what you need to see, what you're seeing, and what it is. Week three, a practical approach to inspections, what to look for, and when to take action. And because really and truly, that is what we're doing every time we go in, right? It's what we're looking at. What are we seeing? What am I supposed to do with what I'm seeing? And then lastly, on week four, we're going to talk about wax moths, the cleanup crew you don't want. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. Also, don't forget about Ask Blake Bot, because really and truly, that is your little window into a lot of information. Try it. It's on our website. It's there, that little yellow, bright yellow, click it at the bottom right of the screen. Use it. It's getting smarter and smarter and smarter. Okay, Blake, I'm ready for that other slide. Okay, so I want to talk to you quickly about wax moths. That is the cleanup crew you don't want. But I'm going to say, having been an instructor for a lot of years and in the beekeeping community for even more, the number one, I'm going to say, confusion of wax moths is knowing the difference between wax moths and small hive beetles. So I really delved in deep into this article about identifying what you're looking at because there's a big difference in how you handle them, right? So being able to identify wax moths, they're 3/4 inch long when they're in the moth form, and then they're 3/4 to 2 inches long in the larval stage when it's the little worm. Okay, so you really and truly can tell the difference between it and a small hive beetle because of a small hive beetle, hence the name, it's much smaller. It's about 1/4 inch long in the larval stage. So that is your number one indicator, the size of the larva, and that's usually what you see first. The damage, unfortunately, they will consume wax and pollen like nothing else. They'll leave, like this picture shows, leave a little silk tunnel running through the comb. This picture shows one that's no problem to fix. You can just get your hive tool and scrape that out, put it back into, freeze it overnight, and put it back into a hive that'll clean it up and rebuild the comb. That one's no big deal. It's the one that goes really south and looks completely overrun that isn't so easy to fix. The final stage, which is what that is, they spin silken cocoons from in the corners, crevices, on top bars, and they'll burrow into the wood. And if you've never seen that, of course, I've got a picture in the article. It is, I'm gonna use a term that sounds funny. It's a trip. It's like what ate the wood? It truly will burrow a little hole, a little groove out into the wood, and we've not had that happen very many times, but it's something to see, I'll tell you. Number four, I couldn't have made this more bold, does not kill a hive. So if you're a new beekeeper and you you opened up your hive and you saw that, it's not what killed your hive. Reading the article about what your indicators probably were before that happened, but the wax moths did not do it. They're just the cleanup crew. Strong colonies absolutely can control them, and the frames can be salvaged, and I go into detail about that. The takeaway, know the difference between a small hive beetle and a wax moth, and keep strong colonies because this is just a pest that we can handle, but the strong colonies will take care of it and make it almost virtually never a problem. So that's all I got, Blake.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sherry. Always great to get those snippets of information and golden insights. All right, well, let's jump out into the bee yard and see what's going on in the bees. And then we've got some questions from you guys. So once we come back from the bee yard, Sherry's got some questions you guys sent in, and we'll do a little bit of a Q&A. So come join me out in the bee yard.
When I'm checking hives after I've harvested honey, going through summer, I'm really looking for just a couple of main things. I'm looking for the bee population because that's a clue as to the health of the hive. I'm checking on the queen and how well she's laying and what her brood pattern looks like. And then the big thing I'm looking at is making sure I have a mite treatment on the hive or I've treated for mites and that's working. And then finally, I'm looking at food stores. The big two are really food stores and making sure mites are under control. I usually check bees in the summertime in the morning or in the evening just because it is so hot outside. And that's for my own sake, but then also for the bees. You know, I don't really want to disturb them when they're trying to fan hard and keep the hive cool. So with this hive in particular, you know, the first thing I always do when I open up a hive is I look down between the frames. They've got about, 7 to 8 frames full of bees in this hive. And I'm not gonna go deep. I'm just gonna open the hive and look at some of these frames on the edge to see, hey, do they have uncapped cells of nectar or syrup? How much pollen do they have? How much brood do they have? How's the bee population look compared to the last time? I am feeding these hives because we took most of the honey away. So I've got lots of frames that look like this, which is a great frame, capped brood, I'm sorry, the capped honey up in the corners and then uncapped honey or syrup there in the middle. So I want to see that. I want to see that they've got, about 30 pounds of excess honey. And then I'm going to just check on the brood and make sure that the brood looks okay, and I've got brood. So you can't see it in the video, but this frame has lots of eggs in it and larvae, so that's always great to see. And our goal over the summer is really just to help the bees maintain their strength. I don't really expect them to grow much because it's a winter dearth. I'm sorry, it's a summer dearth, and they aren't going to be growing a whole lot. I've got eggs, I've got larvae. The brood pattern isn't great, but honestly, I don't expect it to be that great during the summer. I have my Apivar strips in the hive to treat for Varroa mites. And one thing I'm not seeing hardly any of is I'm really not seeing hardly any pollen. So when I look through this hive, I always want to see a cumulative half frame of pollen. So if I were to add up all the frames of pollen throughout the whole hive, I want to see at least a half a frame. And I'm really seeing very, very little. Here, I'll show you what I'm seeing in most cases. So I've only seen a couple of frames that have a little bit of pollen on them. Let's see if I can get to where you can see it. So if you look in the dead center of that frame, and I don't think you're going to be able to see it really well, I see a few cells full of pollen. If you're ever in doubt as to whether something is capped honey or pollen, let me grab my hive tool. Just take your hive tool and dig in a little bit and see if it's liquid or if it's solid. If it's solid, then it's going to be pollen. So like this cell right here, I can kind of tunnel in and look, I've got this, I've got this pollen on my hive tool here. If it's liquid, so here's some capped cells, it's liquid underneath, well, that's just honey. So you can dig in a little bit if you're unclear on what's what. But I'm really seeing almost no pollen, and that means that I'm probably going to go ahead and give this hive a pollen patty. Again, not because I'm trying to get them to grow like crazy, but I'm really wanting them to at least maintain their bee population so that they've got plenty of bees going into winter so that they can properly overwinter. So I'm just going to do a really quick check in the bottom box here. I've got a pretty decent bee population, making sure I'm not missing any big frames of brood or anything down below, or any frames full of pollen. And again, I've got some decent brood, but almost no pollen in the bottom box either. And I really only have 4 or 5 frames of honey in this hive. So I'm going to feed this hive a couple gallons of syrup. I'll give them about half a gallon or so per week for the next 4 weeks or so. And then I'm going to give them probably 1 pollen patty every 7 to 10 days. And they should be good to go throughout the summer.
Welcome back from the bee yard, and hopefully that was helpful and informative for you guys. And with that, Sherry, what are some questions that our friends have for us?
Well, I'll tell you, there've been some of them are a little in depth, so I'm gonna let you take
Great.
them.
Oh,
I'll
well,
let
we'll
you
see how
know.
that goes.
Yeah, right. They're going to challenge you. Nah, they won't challenge you, but they are in depth. So the very first one that I got is first year beekeeper. I found a couple of queen cells in my bottom box. The top box still has room for the queen to lay, though. What do I do with the queen cells? Should I add another box?
That's a good one. And it's a little hard because I have some questions. And one of them would be, did they find uh is it like capped queen cells or queen cups? And do they excuse me, do they still have eggs and larvae in the hive? Or are there no eggs and larvae? So let's kind of take each one. If there's just queen cups, which is a little like a start of a queen cell with no egg in it, and you've still got eggs and larvae, that's perfectly normal. Bees will draw out those little queen cups just in case they need them. They don't become a queen cell until there's something being developed in it. Now, if there's something being developed in it, and you still got plenty of room up in your second box, I'm going to say either your hive went queenless and they're raising a new queen, or they're superseding their queen. So their old queen is failing and they're raising a new one. Either way, here's what I would do. Um, well, there's two routes you can go. You can wipe them out and buy a mated queen and install that mated queen. So you'd have to wipe out the queen cells and then kill the old queen if she's in there, and install a new queen. Or you could just let them go ahead and raise those queen cells. If those queen cells were already capped or nearing being capped, I would probably add a frame of brood from a neighboring hive to boost up the strength and hope that they can successfully raise their own queen.
Hmm, good answer. That's a very good answer. I
Oh,
had answered
so
it in my
that's
mind, and that's a good answer.
good to know.
Good. You didn't need my approval, but that's very good.
So,
All right,
uh,
let's move on to the next one because I've got lots of questions about that one too. That makes the answer so different in different scenarios. If you have no sugar water in the hive and there's not a nectar flow, will the bees draw comb from capped honey? I love this question.
that's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. And
I haven't either.
that's a I can be pretty direct on that one. The answer is no, they will not. I don't care if you have five deep boxes full of capped honey and a box of foundation on top. If there's no flow and you're not feeding them, those bees are not going to draw out that comb in 99% of the time. They aren't going, the bee, if you think about it, as a human, the bees are the same way. We're not going to build another building if we have no reason or no need to put anything in that building. So
Exactly.
the bees aren't going to go draw out another box of comb if there's no food coming in that they need to store. So, so feeding or a nectar flow is telling the bees, hey, we've got all this food coming in. We need more space for it. We've got to build more space. Um, if there's none of that coming in, they just aren't going to draw out comb.
And also, just add, and that's right, you're exactly right. And look up to this person who asked the question, look up the bee biology because the wax glands have to, there's something that happens and it has to do with nature, time of year, and nectar for
Yeah.
those wax glands to even work. So, all that into play says your final answer, and your final answer is oh.
No. Yes.
Very good. Very good. All right. Next question. Should I go into winter with double brood boxes or should I split them now? I'm getting mixed input. Go figure. Companion question. I'll throw this in there as right before you answer. How should I handle a very full colony at this point in the summer?
Mm,
That
mm.
is a piggyback.
Great questions. Great questions. And yeah, I'm not surprised you're getting conflicting answers. I think what do they say? If you ask five beekeepers a question, you'll get 10 answers. And
Absolutely.
that's pretty normal. So I've got a pretty strong opinion on that. And that is that we should not split beehives after the 4th of July. I've done it many times and killed a lot of bees doing it. Anytime I've made splits after the 4th of July, by the time next spring rolls around, 50% of them are dead, which
Mhm.
means you are about at the same place as you were before you split them. So
Mhm.
you really didn't gain any extra hives. It's just bees are in shutdown mode in the summer and fall, and they are not growing much. And so getting a split to grow properly is very, very difficult. So there's nothing wrong with having two boxes going into winter. All of my beehives have two boxes going through the winter. I recommend having two boxes going through the winter. So I would absolutely, even if they're strong and full, I would leave them be and then make your splits next spring. You're
Mhm.
going to have an awesome hive next spring and you'll be able to make a lot of splits out of it. As
Mhm.
far as too much room, if you do have two boxes, if whatever boxes you've got on your hive are completely full of bees, I would add another box. It's not because they're going to swarm. It's not because they necessarily need it. It's because it provides a heat barrier. In the hot summer months, if you've got two boxes full of bees, and I should note, and your honey flow is over, you've already harvested honey,
Right.
then Yeah, giving them a third box is not a bad idea just to create a heat barrier. And then you can pull it off, in September, once it starts cooling off.
And that third box gives you a little bit of elbow room when the fall flow comes.
Sure. Yeah,
That's always a benefit.
absolutely.
They'll talk in September about fall splits. And yeah, 50-50. I'm on that page, but there's
Yeah,
times that we've done it, and I'm gonna say a lot of times we've done it, but you got 50% that it might work. So
right.
we'll talk about
Right.
that in September.
There you go.
Okay, good answer. Great answer. How much honey should I leave for the bees? We've had decent rain in our area, us too. So they are still bringing in nectar and pollen. Well, bonus for you. Should we remove the supers completely before we treat? Oh, that's a second set of questions. But then it goes on to say, should we remove the supers completely before we treat them for mites or leave some honey for them? It's kind of
Mm. Yeah, it's a good
question.
question. I mean, my goal going through the summer is that my hives, after I've harvested honey, have, 30 to 40 pounds of honey or syrup. So what I do is my brood boxes, I'm never pulling honey out of. So my two brood boxes, whatever honey's in there, the bees keep, and I pull all the honey out of everything above that. So if you've got a deep box and a medium box for brood nests, your medium box should be pretty much full of honey or syrup. If you got two deep boxes, your second deep box should be about two-thirds full of honey or syrup. And that's really just what you're going to want to maintain through the summer and make sure that's what they've got going into the winter.
Mhm.
So, as far as treating or not, if you've got honey supers on that you want to harvest honey out of, you should certainly pull those off and harvest the honey before you treat with any sort of a miticide. But if you're just talking about, you've got these two brood boxes and one of them has honey in them, you can certainly go ahead and treat. You're just not going to harvest that honey and eat it.
That's right. That's right. It's just left for them, and
Yeah,
they'll consume it with no problems.
right.
Yep, that's great. I'd have said that too. All right, last one. Is it prudent to move the outside frames that are not drawn towards the center and
Mm.
move drawn frames to the outside edges?
They don't say if that's a honey super or a brood box, I'm guessing.
I'm gonna guess it's a newish brood box. That's
Okay.
probably if it were my guess, it would have been
Hmm.
a newish brood box.
So, if it's a brood box or a honey super, I would say you can keep in mind that you never want to separate brood. So you never want to put a frame of foundation between two frames of brood. If you move them in, they will draw them out a little bit faster.
Mhm.
So it's not going to hurt anything to move them in one or two spaces. It's also not necessary. The bees are going to draw frames out when they need the space. So if they
Mhm.
need the space, they will draw it out to store
Right.
honey in. So you could do it, but it's also unnecessary. And yeah, except the bees will do it when they need to.
Yeah. I get this question so often you can't imagine a phone call. They're not building the outside frames. They will when they need it. They
Right.
will. You just really
Exactly.
don't need to manipulate it at that point.
Right.
Oh, all right. We're good.
Good
That's good.
questions.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Thank you,
All right.
Sherry. All
Sure.
right, let's see what else we've got going on. So let's talk about August tips and what we need to be doing in the month of August. Here's the drought map. I love showing this every month. You can see the one on the lower side of the screen. That was from 2024. We had kind of a moderate drought throughout the west, some of the central US, and then the east had a moderate to severe drought in some areas. Check out this year. I mean, the west is suffering pretty bad, getting pretty bad, but the central US and the east is pretty phenomenal. I mean, it's kind of crazy to be in July and just no drought going on. So keep an eye on this map. If you just Google US drought monitor, you can see the drought for your state, and you can even dive down to your county. And this will help give you a clue as to what kind of a summer dearth we're going to have. Um, the worse the drought, the more likely it is that you're going to need to be very proactive on feeding pollen substitute and feeding sugar syrup. So, kind of here's what I'm seeing across the country. I mean, honey flows are largely over in the southern US, and they're about halfway over in most of the northern US. Most of the country is done with the honey flow or really wrapping up. Most of the central and eastern regions have a fair pollen flow. You can see in those regions that there was no drought at all. Pretty fair pollen flow for the summer. And keep in mind, though, there can be a big difference in various regions, but overall, the central and eastern regions are not showing um, a terrible summer dearth, even though there is a dearth. Here's what I'm expecting to see inside summer hives this time of year. I'm expecting to see 6 to 8 frames of brood. On a normal year, queens are starting to shut down in some areas. That doesn't mean you're going to have no brood. It just means you're going to have 6 to 8 frames of brood instead of 10 to 12 frames of brood like you might have had in the spring. I also expect to see the brood getting a little spotty. So these aren't big, compact patterns, though you will see that in some hives. It's getting a little bit spottier. Something I have a lot of folks ask about is high moisture honey. They're saying, "Hey, my honey is wet." You can see this picture; it's actually fermenting in the cells. That's pretty unusual. Some ways to prevent high moisture honey is doing the shake test before you harvest. So, before you harvest honey, hold that frame horizontally over the hive and shake it. And if honey or nectar just rains out of it, it's not ready to harvest. If you can't shake any honey out, it's about ready to harvest. High moisture honey, you can freeze it. And even though that won't pull a lot of moisture out of it, it will prevent it from fermenting until you're ready to use it. You can heat honey. Heating honey with like and heating it with the lid off of the container will pull moisture out of it. Cooling it will also pull moisture out of it. If you put it in a very cold room or in a room with a window unit and leave the lid off, it will suck moisture out of it. Granulating the honey. Once you've harvested, if it's too high in moisture, you can add previously granulated or previously creamed honey into it and intentionally granulate it, and that'll help prevent the fermentation as well. For removing moisture, scan that QR code. You can get some information, but you can put the honey inside of a chest cooler like this one, and then there's a dehumidifier inside that cooler. That works great. So you just leave the lid off the honey, you stir it once a day, and let that dehumidifier run, and that'll suck a ton of moisture out of the honey. It's probably my favorite, cheapest, easiest way to pull moisture out of honey after it has been harvested. So, as a reminder, if you've harvested your honey, make sure your hives have a total of at least 2 boxes. That'll help them get through the hot summer months without overheating. Honey supers can be returned to the hive after harvesting for the bees to clean. Um, and then you can leave an extra super or a third box on that hive if it's strong over the summer. Now, you don't have to return the box onto the hive for the bees to clean it up after you harvest. I usually like to put my honey supers directly into storage right after I have harvested the honey out of them. And that wet honey, it will be great next year when you put the super back on. The bees will instantly move back up into that super and start using it because they'll be attracted to that honey residue that's left from the previous year. Keep in mind that the leading cause of hive death is Varroa mites, and Varroa mite populations typically hit critical peak levels in July and August. This is the leading cause of winter death. Now, these hives with high Varroa mite populations typically don't die in the summer, but the bromide levels get critically high. They spread a lot of viruses to the bees, and then the hive will eventually dwindle out in October, November, December. But the damage was done now. So keep in mind you've got to do something about varroa mites right now if you haven't already. While a visual inspection of varroa mites is typically pointless. Here are some common things that you might see that could indicate that there is a problem. Bald brood can be one of two things. If it's in a very linear pattern, like this picture, then it's tipped with a raised lip around the cell, again, like this picture here. It's often caused by wax moths tunneling underneath the larva. It's typically found in really small, weak hives that have 6 frames of bees or less. Now, what's indicative of a varroa mite problem is hygienic behavior. And this is when there is no linear pattern, there's just cells randomly uncapped throughout the hive. The cells appear more chewed down. It indicates the hive is removing larvae or pupa infected with varroa. It's a positive trait that the bees are removing those larvae that are infected, but it's a negative indicator that you've got very high, most likely, very high varroa mite levels. So if you're seeing this uncapped brood, I'm not talking larva, that's supposed to be uncapped, but if you're seeing uncapped pupa kind of spread throughout the hive, that is a potential visual indicator that you've got a problem. Keep in mind, this is the Varroa threat level trend. You can see that in July, August, September, you really peak. And so that's really in that before it peaks. So in June or July, really right after you harvest your honey is when you've got to do some treatments. Now, to do a bromide test to see if you have high bromide levels, you could do a sticky board test or an alcohol wash. Either of these QR codes will take you to a video that shows you on our YouTube channel that shows you how to use a sticky board or how to do an alcohol wash. Now, these are both fairly effective. The alcohol wash is far more effective, but also more difficult and kills bees. I would recommend, I mean, 95% of hives need a treatment in July. So you can do a test before you do a treatment if you want. Most hives are going to need a treatment regardless. And then after you do the treatment, you want to do a test to make sure the treatment actually worked. Because a lot of treatments don't work incredibly well. So it's very important to test afterwards. Two of the most common treatments, there are certainly others out there, Apivar and Apigard are two of the most common treatments. Um, and again, I think these are both good treatments, but you need to monitor and make sure they worked after you do the treatment. Okay, a quick overview of summer care. Here's kind of my goal list, if you will, for summer. My goal is to maintain a 30 to 40 pound surplus of syrup or honey in my second brood box. And I accomplish that by feeding 1/4 to 1/2 a gallon of syrup per week until that 30 to 40 pounds is stored in the second brood box. As a reminder, 30 pounds is one medium box, 90% full of honey, or one deep box, 2/3 full of honey. I would test for mites now and do a treatment. I would feed 2 pollen patties each month now through October. I'm equalizing brood between hives if needed. So it just means if you've got one hive with 10 frames of brood and one hive with four, take a frame of brood or two out of that one with 10 and give it to the weaker one to kind of boost them up before winter gets here. Finally, I make sure each hive has a second box or it's in the shade. Now, if they have two boxes, there's no reason for them to be in the shade. But if they just have one box, they can absolutely overheat and and they need uh, a second box. Speaking of keeping hives cool, there's a number of things you can do. You can use screen bottom boards. They help keep hives cool. You can crack the lid at the top as long as you're not having any robbing problems, and that'll help keep them cool. And then you can add an empty box up on top, like the picture you see in the upper right, to give them some dead air space. And then afternoon shade is great for the summertime. I did this test a handful of years ago in the heat of the summer just to see, how hot would it get inside of a hive, on a 90 something degree day. And both of these hives are single story hives. The one that's 100 degrees on the inside was a really strong hive. The one that was 105, which is way too hot, was a really weak hive. So weak hives have a much harder time keeping themselves cool than stronger hives do. And single story hives have a much harder time keeping themselves cool. Um, Hives with two boxes, weak or strong, were able to keep themselves cool, no problem. So the worst combination you can have is a single story hive that's weak. They are going to overheat in the summer, inevitably. The single story hive was strong, was working extremely hard to try to keep themselves cool, but they were able to do it. Don't forget to provide a water source. So your bees need water. So if there's not a pond or a creek nearby that they can go, within a quarter mile or so that they can go get water from, then you need to step in and provide water for the bees. Working bees in the summer heat, try to work them early in the morning or late in the evening. That's for your sake and the bees' sake. You are going to get overheated in the heat of the day, and so are the bees. So, when we're working bees in the summer, we start right before sunup, and we try to wrap it up by 10 o'clock in the morning or so. Or you do it right at the evening, right as the sun is setting. And that's really going to help keep you and your bees a whole lot cooler. I also don't try to gauge hive population in the heat of the day because there's so many bees that are out foraging or under the hive, keeping cool or fanning. It's really hard to get a good feel for the strength and population of your hive when it's so hot outside. So if you're trying to get a feel for, hey, how many bees are in my hive? What's the strength? You're really going to want to do that early in the morning or late in the evening. Remember, if you're doing an inspection and it's really hot outside, don't leave frames exposed to the direct sunlight in the heat of the day for more than 30 seconds. It's amazing how quickly the wax can literally melt off the frame if you leave it exposed for long. So inspections should be pretty fast, especially if it's direct sunlight and hot outside. If you do inspect during the heat of the day, try to keep inspections at 5 to 10 minutes per hive or less. So you don't want to spend a ton of time in the hive. Something else you might see this time of year is increased bearding and reduced flight. So you may see a lot of bees on the front of the hive. They're just trying to get out and help keep the hive cool. So if you're seeing this, usually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go add another box to the hive just to help keep them cool. It's not a problem. It just means it's hot and the bees are trying to stay cool, and having all those warm bodies in the hive isn't helpful. You'll probably also notice that the bees aren't flying as much in the heat of the day in the summer, and that's pretty normal too. There's just not a lot for them to go forage for, and it's hot, and so they are not going to be flying as much. Open feeding pollen and syrup. So the pros of open feeding, so putting these are boxes that have division board feeders in them that we filled full of syrup, and that was a great way to open feed bees. The pros is it stimulates a honey flow and encourages brood rearing, and it's fast and it's easy. The downside of open feeding is with all those bees from all those different hives gathering up on the same place, they can spread viruses and mites. It's not a huge problem. The bigger problem is that you're feeding all the bees in the neighborhood, so not just yours. You're feeding everybody, and so you're kind of wasting syrup. And so I'm not a big fan of open feeding syrup in general. Usually the hives that need it the most, the weaker hives, don't have enough forage or field force to really go gather the syrup. So, your big hives get bigger and your weak hives get weaker. Also note it's usually too early for open pollen feeding. And I didn't change that note, but if you're in an extreme dearth, sometimes in the summer they will open feed on pollen, but only in a pretty extreme scenario. Usually there needs to be no natural pollen before they will touch pollen powder. Fixing weak hives. It's not uncommon to have weaker, some of your hives to be weaker. It matters because we're in August and we only have 2 months to 2.5 months, depending on where in the country you are, for the bees to grow. So, um, assessing the strength of a hive, we have to ask, what is a frame of bees? A frame of bees is one deep frame covered at least two-thirds with bees front and back. Keep in mind, you need to be doing that check early in the morning or late in the evening. And the way I do it is I take off the lid of the hive, and before I smoke it, I'm counting how many frames are covered with bees. So you can see in these pictures, these top two are, 8 to 10 frames of bees. This bottom one is 5 to 6 frames of bees. So if you have a hive this time of year, I'd say if it's 7 or 8 frames of bees or less, you need to try to boost up their strength. And you can do that by adding brood, adding bees, controlling the varroa mites, feeding syrup, feeding pollen substitute, and feeding probiotics and essential oils. I would feed them complete or Apis biologics. So that's kind of what you can do to try to save any hive that is weak this time of year. My favorite is adding brood. Adding 1 or 2 frames of capped brood from another hive that's really strong will absolutely boost up the strength of that hive. I wouldn't necessarily add bees this time of year, but you absolutely have to make sure that varroa mites are under control because if that hive is weak because the varroa mites are out of control, they're just going to die no matter how much brood you add to them. So making sure the varroa mites are under control is key. Making sure you've got a good laying queen is key. After that, adding brood and making sure they've got all the carbs and protein, so syrup and pollen that they need is the best thing you can do to boost up a weak hive. So with that, I will see you all in September. I can't wait. September is when we really start shifting to winter and winter preparation. I mean, a lot of what we talked about today was winter preparation, which occurs in the summer. If you're not preparing for winter right now, you're behind. So September and October really are the final months where we really start wrapping up management and put our bees to sleep for the winter. And then January, it all starts over again. So can't wait to see you there. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you all in September. Have a great August, everybody.